Recall, for example, that Orientals produce the fewest eggs but have the largest brains, while blacks produce the most eggs but have the smallest brains. But why would Orientals have ended up the most K? At this stage of our knowledge, we cannot know for sure.
It's the Ice Age.
One reasonable hypothesis that fits the data, however,
they lived through an ice age,
is to be found in recent genetic distance studies based on DNA sequencing. These suggest that modern humans evolved in Africa, perhaps even as recently as 200,000 or so years ago, and subsequently migrated northwards to other parts of the globe, with an African, non-African split occurring about 110,000 years ago, and a Caucasoid Oriental split occurring 41,000 years ago. It seems reasonable to postulate that as populations moved north, they encountered more challenging environments, including the last ice age, which ended on...
let me know on both streams if the audio is okay when I pause it like this. I was in Iceland recently, and it's a really funny thing, cold weather, right? I mean, if you think about the differences between races, and you think about that certain races didn't ever experience winter. And if you've ever been outside in weather that's less than freezing, let alone certain areas in northern Asia and in northern Europe where temperatures drop below zero for many months of the year, you begin to understand that it's impossible for evolution not to shape two different subspecies differently, two different breeds, two different races within the same species. Cold weather. Cold weather.
Only 12,000 years ago. And thus the more stringent were the selection pressures for intelligence, forward planning, and sexual and personal restraint. The Siberian cold experienced by Oriental populations was more severe than even that experienced by other pale-skinned populations in Northern Europe. There are two final points that I'd like to make before concluding. First, in any analysis of the kind presented here, it really must be emphasized that there is enormous variability within each of the populations. Since these distributions clearly overlap, it is always problematic to generalize from a group average to any particular individual. Second, recall my earlier remarks that only 50% of the variance is genetic, and that 50% is due to the environment. Even the genetic effects are necessarily mediated by neuroendocrine and psychosocial mechanisms, thus availing much opportunity for intervention and the alleviation of suffering. Thank you.
All right, I think we're on a little bit of a delay here on OBS, so if any OBS wizard can tell me how to get rid of this like 10 to 15 second delay, that would be helpful. Just write it in the chat, or I'll look it up online while we're doing this. But that was David Suzuki. I'm sorry, that was JP Rushton. For those who joined from YouTube, I covered about 35 minutes worth of material before we started the YouTube stream, giving a background for people who don't know who J.P. Rushton was. J.P. Rushton and Arthur Jensen were the original human biodiversity scientists, and I posted a link in the chat to the seminal work on race evolution and behavior by J.P. Rushton, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to pull it up on the screen here. This was a chart that really changed my life about 10 years ago when I saw it for the first time. And I think everyone should see it. It's one of these things that you just can't look away from. It's this is from of the PDF that I sent around. This is on page 5 of the PDF. And here is all of the data collected by Rushton and Jensen. And you can see that some of the traits, and it plots Asians, Europeans, and Africans on a scale, and you see that there's a fairly linear, I mean, it's a directly linear change in all of these traits, and he goes on to list 60 more. 60 in total throughout this book. And Hispanics fall between whites and blacks, between Europeans and Africans. I'm just going to check in on the chat here for a second. I'm going to let you just take in this chart while I check the comments. All right, and let me know if you guys need me to zoom in on this. I think I'll do that, and we'll take it item by item. But this is important for people to know who are new to HBD. And remember that the last words of J.P. Rushton there were to treat everyone equally, treat everyone kindly, to do its best for humanity, but also to pay attention to science. That was his concluding message. He came in peace and love. So when we jump into this, you'll see that certain items here are obviously culturally influenced and arguably environmental. Things like impulsivity, dominance, activity level, aggressiveness. We all know that habits can change all these things. Although science has developed now to where we are in 2018, to having fairly accurate percentages of just how heritable each of these personality dispositions are. But about a decade ago when I saw this, there were certain things that I just couldn't get out of my head. Right? Like, for example, IQ test scores. We love to talk about IQ in this movement. But you can argue that, yeah, well, IQ, maybe, if you study for it, you can make arguments around IQ that excuse it, especially if you're not totally steeped in the literature to understand just how well placebo tested everything has been, and how many controls have been done for lurking or confounding variables. But these are the ones that got to me. Two-egg twinning, and he mentioned this in the debate. The fact that twinning rates are different, predictably different, in Asian, European, and African mothers is clearly not explainable by environment. The fact that that bone density is different. I mean, there are things that are, the fact that height isn't, and the list goes on in this book. But this blank slate equalism, which was the topic of this conversation tonight, for those who joined from YouTube, one of the things we covered before we got into the stream was Steven Pinker's recent assaults on the alt-right. I'm just gonna check this real quick so that you guys see it. Steven Pinker wrote, the alt-right embraces the bizarre anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Jewish intellectuals advance Jewish interests with theories that undermine Christian culture. Nathan Coffness refuted this idea and now responds to a reply by its major proponent. So you have Steven Pinker, who is arguably the most famous psychology in the world today, who made his bread and butter by publishing The Blank Slate, defeating progressive equalist dogma, although it obviously had its resurgence in the 2000s that came back and bit Pinker. But that's the reason that we're getting into this tonight, because I want everyone to get regrounded in our foundations here. And Steven Pinker, who is not shy about biological differences, except with respect to Gentile and Jew dynamics. This is very funny. But Steven Pinker got famous for publishing The Blank Slate, but it was J.P. Rushton and Arthur Jensen who were the true blank slate pioneers. That is, they were the true brave ones, the true heroes of history, the ones who stuck their necks out, the ones who got bankrupted, who got assaulted. Even E.O. Wilson had a pie thrown in his face for being a sociobiology advocate. But now we're going to watch the historic rebuttal here by David Suzuki, which was, now remember, this is being broadcast to millions of people in 1989. People are huddled around their TVs. This is before the internet ever came out. And as I mentioned on the Gab stream, J.P. Rushton was the Jordan Peterson of his day. He was a cultural phenomenon. He was a tour de force. He was somebody who would not be butted down by, he would not be intimidated by his academic peers. And David Suzuki was brought in because nobody else could challenge Rushton. And Suzuki is not an evolutionary psychologist, not an evolutionary biologist. And this was the debate that basically ended up getting Rushton deplatformed from polite society. This is what, if you can imagine a modern day equivalent, imagine a live debate being aired with Jordan Peterson, after which Jordan Peterson is no longer allowed to be a practicing professor. He's no longer allowed to, although Rushton did go on to continue to be I think a tenured professor, but he was socially outcast and forever known as a pariah after that. But imagine the same thing happened to Jordan Peterson today because of this. And here's how Suzuki responds to the science. Science.
I'd like to thank Dr. Rushton for his remarks, and I'd now like to call upon Dr. Suzuki to give his opening remarks, reminding him that he has 20 minutes in which to speak.
All that applause before he even speaks, right? But get ready for this, guys. You're about to hear the science rebuttal to human biodiversity, all right? You're about to hear what the top scientists in the world have to say to rebut things like twin studies and genetic inheritance and 60 different traits plotted linearly, showing a near universal correlation with. Here you go. This is how science was defeated in the study of intelligence in 1989 by the following rebuttal.
I feel very proud of this audience tonight. You've shown that we're in Canada and not South Africa with your politeness.
Oh, what a prophetic statement that is. Remember, this was a pre-apartheid ending in South Africa. This was in 1989. Remember, apartheid fell in South Africa in 1994, and 25 years later, white land is being expropriated without compensation. And Boers have a 6 times higher murder homicide rate than do police officers. They're getting slaughtered. But funny comment here from David Suzuki. All right, on we go.
As a London boy, I'm always happy to return to my hometown. Tonight is different. I did not want to be here. I do not believe that we should dignify this man and his ideas in public debate. I am deeply concerned as a broadcaster with the media's frenzy that have provided Rushton a wide audience for ideas that simply do not qualify as science.